Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show, a podcast that won't be silenced. We raise the voice of those typically not heard in mainstream conversations, including the millions of children that literally have food on their table every day because of federal programs like SNAP. This is your host, Ray Collazo. You know that Philly sports fan that you adore in your life, but it's currently driving you crazy because of their total obnoxiousness, because of the success of Philly sports right now? Yeah, I'm one of those guys. Thank you so much for joining us. You can listen and download Ray's Talk Show anywhere you can catch a podcast. SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, even YouTube. On Twitter, catch us at Ray's Podcast. Facebook at Ray's Podcast / Facebook.com/Ray's Podcast or at Ray's Latino Talk on IG. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Ray's Talk Show. I will be interviewing hip-hop artist and Philly sports superfan Mario Collazo, a.k.a. Planetary from Outerspace and the Army of the Pharoahs crew, on how the merging of sports, music, politics, culture are all coming together in Philadelphia and what that means for the social justice movement nationally moving forward. And I will have updates on what the latest court decision means for DACA in the larger immigration discussion, how Puerto Rican politicians are trying to impact the upcoming federal elections, and maybe a few words about Kanye in a second. Oh, Kanye. But first, a lesson that's becoming clearer and clearer to me as I've watched the Latin Billboards tonight. You know, first of all, it's one of the rare times I ever watched Spanish language television, these music award shows. And it continues to highlight the dominance of Latino youth culture and hip-hop culture in our larger society. You know, when we think about Latinos, typically U.S.-based Hispanics, Latinx population, we tend to focus on the image of our community through the lens of like our tia or our grandmother, when in fact, the typical reality is much closer to our little niece. Musica Urbana artists are dominant cultural figures. And I'll say this, and I believe it. Just look at the numbers and look at the reality. The Osunas, the Nati Natashas, the Becky G's, the Bad Bunnies, Daddy Yankee, Nicky Jam, J Balvin, they're the leaders of the global hip-hop movement as much or more than Migos, than Kendrick Lamar, than many of the popular English language hip hop artists of today. Look at their YouTube views. Look at their iTunes streaming numbers. They are the dominant music force in the digital space right now. And, you know, it's interesting to see this award show, which is featuring these Latin trap, reggaeton, urban music artists, and very much, you know, Spanish language hip hop culture manifesting on this like kind of tired, you know, kind of old school platform like mainstream Spanish language television like Telemundo. It's like having a hip hop show in like a senior citizen center. It can work, but it doesn't seem to fit anymore. And I bring this up because from a organizing perspective and trying to move our community forward, elevating the leadership of our community, and just trying to get things done related to our issues, is that if we don't message and have the messengers for our work that reflect the reality of our community, we will not be successful in mobilizing our community. We need to embrace this culture, which essentially is hip-hop culture manifesting itself in the U.S. Latino and Latin populations and throughout Latin America. And we have to embrace these artists that have tremendous influence. And artists, by the way, that in large part have shown a willingness to use their platforms for good, whether it's supporting dreamers, DACA recipients, the ongoing philanthropic and advocacy work that needs to be done on behalf of the island of Puerto Rico. These folks got a heart and are generally willing to use it for good. So as part of that, we really have to focus our messaging on the issues that our younger people care about. You know, the millennial and Generation Z Latino populations are the dominant group in our cohort. And we have to talk about the issues that are resonating the most with them and in the manner that they care about. So when we're talking about, helping close that gap between the haves and have-nots of our community, which is even stronger and more distinct, we have to talk about what are the factors that are preventing our folks from climbing into the middle class and beyond. So the childcare needs, the tax credits that could be used to invest in our community, our younger labor class, education, and look at the kind of lack of support our teachers in places that are essentially servicing primarily Latino students in places like Arizona. In much respect to our teachers and our labor organizers out and activists out in Arizona this week that are standing up for ourselves in the education of our young people in a state like Arizona, which ranks 48th, 49th, 50th in teacher pay and in other metrics that speak to the lack of investment that's taking place to our young people, which is truly one of the civil rights challenges of 2018 and beyond. The impact of mass incarceration. Again, these are conversations that are harder to have, that bring up a lot of pain in our community. The opioid crisis hitting our young people, the healthcare gaps that still exist in our community. So we have to not only student loan debt, which is impacting the ones lucky enough to even attain higher education in our community. So we have to begin to address these issues, not only in the flavor or the dimension that impacts our younger population the more so, but also literally and figuratively speak their language. So embrace the Musica Urbana movement and the larger Latino youth culture movement, Latinx youth culture movement that it's speaking to, and let's find platforms to elevate their voices. I'll continue to say that Emma Gonzalez is probably the most important Latino leader in our community right now. And so how do we continue to elevate voices like that are raising themselves up in movements that are not traditionally associated with the Latinx population? One of the reasons that that our DACA young people are the most visible, generally speaking, the most visible leadership we have amongst our youth communities, that it's not that they have the most to say. They have a lot to say, and we need to continue to support that, but they're the most organized. So how do we not only support the youth organizing happen across all these issue areas, but how do we truly have a movement that is reflective of really who we are as a community? So I want to continue to support and highlight the influence of the urban Latino movement on our larger society, and kudos to our folks making moves out in the Latino billboards. Man, I almost feel like the Puerto Ricans have their own show. Because, no disrespect to the other people, but we're clocking on these awards. Anyway, but it's all one big family. And, obviously my Boricuas making moves. Keep making that money, young people. Do your thing. You listen to Ray's Talk Show. Before we get into the conversation with Mario Collazo, a.k.a. Planetary from the hip-hop group Outerspace, I got to say a few words about Kanye. We take that episode, the interview with Mario a few nights ago before the Kanye fiasco. So, he's gone on social media essentially stating some support for Donald Trump, and also sort of stating, I have a right for my opinion once he got the pushback. And, simply said, it's interesting how these issues get conflated by the right wing, right? So as soon as Kanye makes these statements and has these visuals of him wearing his MAGA hat, the right wing, immediately jumps on us for pushing back on that, saying, well, people have a right to their opinion, it's a free country, Black conservative thought should be respected and all this kind of stuff. And it's interesting, similar to the Colin Kaepernick situation where, Colin simply stating, using his First Amendment right to speak up on an issue by kneeling, and his other media outreach on it, is criticized for disrespecting the military when that had nothing to do with the conversation and the message he was trying to articulate and express. And similarly, us woke folks are not trying to say Kanye doesn't have a First Amendment right to speak up. We have a First Amendment right to state the obvious, that he's being an ass. I don't know where Kanye is at. Some would speculate, like my brother did in a text conversation we had. The part of this is a marketing ploy. He's got several projects coming out in the next coming weeks and months. Some are pointing to his past battles with mental illness, saying that he's got some issues. It's somewhere in there, but the bottom line is that we have to hold our community accountable, including people like Kanye, who has had a colorful history with speaking out on various issues at various times that had various meanings of significance, and push back when we believe he's wrong. And in this case, we think he's really wrong. He may not see the effects as someone that's, even though he's African-American from the inner city of Chicago, him as a quite wealthy person right now that sort of lives in a bubble in many ways, may or may not see the effects of President Trump's policies. And actually, a few people of color in the country may benefit from them with the tax cut to the rich. But the reality is, it's pretty hard to argue that these policies and this rhetoric are doing harm to many of the communities that have been his strongest supporters over the years. So we have every right to push back. We have every right to boycott his music if we want to. We have every right to clap back on him on Twitter if we want to. And again, this is not an attempt to say a litmus test of, all black people have to be flaming progressives, but we do have to push back on opinions we disagree with. And so you don't see African Americans calling on Colin Powell to no longer be black. There are space for variations of thought, but as you can see from a Colin Powell or other conservatives of color, many times they've been pushing back. There's many examples of people like that, like Congresswoman Rossello and others, who have pushed back on this very dangerous administration. So, Kanye, we hope you're well, and you're a supremely talented guy that's troubled on some level. And so we hope you get clarity and peace in your life. But in the meantime, we're going to have to push back on the bullshit. I asked Mario, again, we'll get to this conversation in a second. I asked him about where he thought Chance the Rapper fell in this conversation. He sort of got out there and tried to defend Kanye. And, I on some level, Mario texted me back and said, well, on some level, Chance is trying to use this opportunity to sort of elevate his voice on some level look comparable to Kanye's, which is not the case. He's big, but he ain't that big. And he may feel a personal loyalty to Kanye because not only be fellow Chicagoans, but earlier on in his career, Kanye was quite helpful to him. So, there may be some personal dynamics in play, surely, that come into Chance's calculation to sort of, on some level, try to stick up for Kanye in social media. But we got to hold Chance accountable as well. So let's get into the conversation. Speaking of where hip hop falls in all these conversations about social justice and our movement here at Ray's Talk Show, let's now listen to Mario Collazo and my conversation earlier this week, talking about sort of the Free Meek Mill movement and how it all has the confluence of sports, music, culture have all come together in this microcosm of Philadelphia life that's really speaking to bigger dynamics in our society, and how all of these factors, celebrity, culture, the arts, politics, are coming together in some very interesting ways locally that are going to have ramifications for our conversations. And what can we learn from those what's happening in Philadelphia right now to further these discussions and further progress for our community. And then I'll come back for my updates about the latest DACA decisions and other issues here on Ray's Talk Show. Well, welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. It's interesting because we talk a lot here on Ray's Talk Show about politics. And if you know me from either our Latino sports talk days or just on social media, you probably have a good sense that I'm a pretty big sports fan. And for a Philadelphia sports fan, this has been a magic carpet ride the last few months. And it's interesting because this is a rare moment when a lot of my interests have come together: sports, culture, Philly, politics, and so I wanted to bring on probably the best person to talk about all those things. One of my brothers, but also a well recognized independent hip hop artist, Mario Collazo, aka Planetary from Outer Space and Army of the Pharoahs. Mario, as a Philly sports fan, it's like we're riding on clouds here.
Yeah, I'm on like 10 clouds. Like, it's crazy. I'm walking around with goosebumps.
We're on a roll.
You know what I'm saying? Seriously, everybody walking down the street, saying hello, everybody smiling. You know, it's different out here, man. It really is.
It is a different vibe.
Everything.
It is a different vibe. Let's start with, I wanted to bring you on the show, Mario, because, I mean, we could talk about this. This could be a Sixer podcast very easily. But really, how it's all, and that's part of the story. But part of the story is how it's all coming together. And Philly is sort of not only the center of sports right now, but sort of like what's happening in America's culture. And so between the Starbucks incident and all the other things happening, and we talked about that incident last week on the show with Mikkel Harrison. But let's just start with, so for people that are listening to this around the world that aren't keeping up, the Philadelphia, two things are happening in Philadelphia right now. The Philadelphia 76ers are the latest hot team. We're sort of the new emerging team with two Hall of Fame level talents, and we've sort of come out of nowhere to be a threat to go to the NBA Finals. At the same time, one of the most prominent rappers in the game right now, Meek Mill, has had some legal issues that have been very questionable about kind of the sentencing he's gotten based on breaking a probation that he's been on for a decade under very suspicious circumstances. So he gets out of nowhere. He gets freed last night and is able to go to the game at Philadelphia. So, Mario, let's just starting from yesterday afternoon when you heard the news Meek Mill was going to be released, and we all knew he was going to be at the game ringing the bell and going to be part of he's very close to the Sixers and the Philadelphia entertainment circle. So just what's the last day and a half been like in Philadelphia with the merging of all these different forces coming together?
Well, I mean, it was crazy. Like, I had mixed emotions about it because I sold my ticket to last night's game. So I was a little upset about that. But I did enjoy it at home with the family, so I'm cool with that. But, I mean, I would have to say, like, I'll use Instagram as an example. My Instagram is probably a lot different than, like your follows and my follows are probably a bit different. And I follow a lot of of the young black culture. I follow a lot of that, mainly because of the guys I work with who are all between like 20 and 30. A lot of the young boys that I don't want to say mentor because that might be giving me too much credit, but they definitely look at me for opinions and stuff like that because it's interesting to them too as well how somebody at 39 years old who still is interested in what they're doing has to say or think, you know what I mean? But I could tell just by that, and I mean my Instagram was it was all Meek Mill pictures. I mean I just see the power in what he does and how he motivates that culture of the city, like the young minority, even white, because it's tied into the sports now because of the Eagles and stuff. But even with that, just how much it influences everybody is what gets me going. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, I've been influenced by rappers all my life, but Meek Mill is no different. So there's nothing he's doing, especially for me, that it motivates me how he motivates other people. You know what I mean? More than it necessarily motivates me personally. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I mean, just the way it feels, it's just it's good to see because you start seeing a lot of young kids, even when they were rallying for him downtown, you just see a lot of motivation in these young kids. And in Instagram, in that world, there's a lot of new, motivators and, mentors for, young guys. There's a kid named LGP Quab, who his whole thing is he's the voice of the youth. I don't know. Have you heard of him before?
A little bit.
His name is LGP Quad. Yeah, he started off by doing like rapping over like old school instrumentals, and it was all positive messages. So he went from that to all of a sudden now he works with Will I Am from Black Eyed Peas.
Mm-hmm.
Got a deal with Foot Locker, Puma. He's doing all these crazy things, and it's all because of a positive message. And it's just rare to see coming from younger people. But, you know, it's out there, but it's finally like surfacing. So it just makes it has everybody's happy. It seems like, you know, and it's Philly, you know, everybody's always, you know, it's always known for like the attitude, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just a different thing. And for me, with the news of Meek Mill yesterday, it got me hyped because I knew like it was dying down. Unfortunately, like the motivation was dying down, and now it's back. So it's good to, you know, it made me feel good because I'm like, wow, you know, like this vibe is like it's getting better and better and better and better, you know, and it's not going anywhere, you know. And it's specifically the black culture because the Flyers lost, and it seems like that had no, like nobody really, you know, everybody's like, yeah, cool, but the positivity is coming from the Sixers, you know what I mean? And Meek or whatever, the three and the Meek. So it's like specifically that. It's good to see. It got me happy. I know that.
Yeah, no,
you know,
yeah.
It changes the vibe. It's all about energy for me. You know, when the energy's good, it's good all around.
Yeah,
even
no.
if things ain't great in somebody's life, the energy's keeping people excited. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and Meek sort of symbolize. You talk about the young people that you work with, but like I think especially for those younger men and younger people in hip hop culture, like he represents not some, you know, yeah, of course his specific case, and it just seemed like a raw deal, but he sort of represented like what a lot of these young boys are going through, trying to do the right thing, maybe have some things in their past, maybe they don't, and then even if they're trying their best, it seems like they can never shake the past. And that message even crossed like racial lines. And I think I was telling you earlier, like the sports, it's amazing the power of sports and music and all how these factors can come together. Because for people that weren't in Philly, like Dreams and Nightmares, Meek Mill's song became basically the Eagles theme song in Philly. So and so that,
I mean, it was big, but yeah, I mean, it took it to a whole nother level, man.
Yeah,
I mean, they're singing it on the Fanatic in the morning. You know, there's like 4-year-old white man singing it. It's just a different thing. It's a whole nother.
Yeah,
it's the summertime. It's the Will Smith summertime of the now. You know.
Yeah. No, and I think the song
it just makes people feel good, like Summertime did with Will Smith.
Yeah.
This makes everybody feel good. You know
and the song, I think, gave people an opportunity to sort of. It gave people that may have been skeptical or not cared or paid attention to Meek's case to take a second look. And you know, the Eagles owners been sympathetic. The Sixers owners, I mean, literally picked them up from prison earlier yesterday. So
that's crazy.
So that's kind of giving. I mean, you know, white kids or white people in Philly like an opportunity to take a second look and say, "Hold on, this is kind of this is unfair," and it's giving them like a safe space to be part of the conversation. So it's been fascinating. I mean, Mary, you're someone that literally grew up like being one of the young boys that hung out with like Jazzy Jeff and Jill Scott and the Roots, and a lot of people that listening to this around the world would be familiar with in Philly with music. This is one of the chances where all of our worlds come together. What's so interesting about this is that you not only have Meek with the sports teams and social media and youth culture. You know, Ben Simmons has his, R&B girlfriend, and she's a part of it. Kevin Hart is a big part of this. You had, Eagle players, other hip hop artists, Philly celebrities. It's like the political piece with Starbucks and like all of these parts of Philadelphia culture and youth culture are all coming together in one city at one time. It's fascinating.
It is. It really is. It's something we've never seen before, not in our lifetime. and I didn't even think I would see it in my lifetime. And it's coming at full speed. I think that's really that's why I mentioned energy, because like it's all about energy, because the positive energy just continues. If you keep it, it continues, and that's what's happening. The energy from the Eagles is lingering to the Sixers, and the whole city is just on the up. It really is fascinating. That's not the best word to use too. It's unreal. I'm watching the game, and I'm seeing all the videos of me coming out the helicopter.
It's unbelievable.
The people in the parking lot going bananas.
Kevin Hart calling him fat this day. You got fat in prison, Meek. And it's like we're all thinking it, but he's the only one that can say it, right? The sports piece cannot be underestimated because one of the race, and as Puerto Ricans who grew up in Philadelphia, sort of in the middle of it. In the 80s, 70s and 80s and 90s, that race has always been part of the underlying discussion in Philly sports. I mean, not only, starting really from what I remember with Randall Cunningham back in the days, like having a flamboyant black quarterback and what that meant for the conversation. Iverson was the height of it because Iverson was the divisive figure. You were either for him, you hated him, or you loved him. And there was all the racial stuff under that.
Basketball forever,
Yeah, but he also
changed it forever.
But he was the most polarizing sports figure because it basically brought the racial divides and the cultural divides of Philly front and center of the sports conversation every day for years.
Yeah, exactly.
But then going now, and the Sixers have continued it, but the Eagles, in a lot of ways, brought Philly together because of the leadership of not only the activists on the team like Malcolm Jenkins, but you had white players like Chris Long that were supporting, and also, and most importantly, Carson Wentz, who wasn't necessarily a part of that movement, but he gave the space for the guys that wanted to address those issues, so it didn't become a divisive issue. So even if it wasn't
right,
he gave them the space to have that conversation. And it never became, even though we had some of the most public players in that issue, in the Colin Kaepernick issue in the NFL involved, it never became an issue amongst the fans. So we all kind of were able to move together, even though we were in different, we still had our own opinions. And it's so hard to find that, I do this shit for a living with politics, it's so hard to find that space. Yeah, and the Eagles were able to have that space, which is crazy, and then Meek Mill gets into the mix.
And I think it's more like, let's say outside of Philly, I think it's more like cities are just owners or whatever the case are just scared to make those kind of moves and just scared to have that light on them. Like, God forbid we show, Zach Ertz and Carson Wentz motivating Malcolm Jenkins, and they just don't like the whole Kaepernick thing. Like, some people are just so scared. They're so scared, because they think they're going to lose money if they do this, and they really just don't put themselves first. A lot of times they worry so much. I just think that's the thing. We started it with the Michael Vick thing. That was risky, but we did it. We gave him some life back. I don't agree with what Mike Vick did. Obviously, nobody does, but he did his time, etc., etc. But what organization was going to give him a job? Philly's always kind of been that, like, look, man, we here. This is what it's about. You know what I mean? Let's do it. They just don't. That's what I love about it. And I think that's why it keeps continuing. You gotta give kudos to those teams. The only real mishap we might have had was the Riley Cooper thing. But the reason I think Riley Cooper even stayed around was because a lot of the players on the team were supporting him.
Yeah, Jason Michael Vick. Michael Vick was front and center of that. That's true.
Michael Vick, they were just like, nah, he's cool. Like, they even shading, whoever was on, I forget. But it was, they were still like, whatever, man. He's with us. They just kept the loyalty, and I think that's really what it is with these Philly teams, man. We're just showing that we stay loyal to each other. You don't hear about no drama or nothing,
No,
it's not even new. It's just to the forefront because we're winning, Yeah.
Yeah. No, but it's the unity between the Eagles, Villanova was at the game last night. Another champion. Jay Wright's kind of been able to, and people that are from Philly, like Villanova was always like, and I know you still don't have a lot of love for Villanova, but kind of like the suburban elite school. But he kind of mitigates that whole situation, and kind of a lot of people are behind Villanova. And then the Sixers. It's interesting because we were talking about this last night, or we were texting about it last night, that the Sixers are so interesting. Nothing will top the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. I mean, that's from a sports perspective that you can't get bigger than in Philly. But there's something about basketball, and basketball's humongous anyway, but there's something about basketball in a city like Philadelphia that it does bring, like you said, like a different energy to the conversation. And I want to ask you this because there's so many, even with this team, not only is basketball big, so when you have a banging team, it's going to be exciting. And Philly's, big basketball city, big black community, it's a big urban community, a lot of tradition with hoops and the culture and stuff. But this team, because of the personalities and the fact that we have all this like exotic stuff going on with the team, we got our best players are from Cameroon and Australia, but they're also like part of social media and like down with Meek. And then we have we have an Italian guy that can play. We just got like so much going on. What do you think about this team is clicking so much with the city? Because they are sort of a unique bunch.
Yeah, you're right. I think what it is, I think they follow the energy of the city. When you're here, why do you think people like the Shady McCoy, like they want to come back? People want to come back. Look at Stauskas sitting in the crowd every day, sitting in the crowd every single day.
This guy got cut from the team, and he on his off days he's sitting watching us.
Yeah, the city creates a vibe that wants people to be here. You know what I mean? It's just, and I think they just follow that vibe. You see it all the time. You see, Biz Markie was in the building. There were just a lot of crazy people there last night. Biz Markie, he's known to be a Philadelphia sports fan, so it really wasn't that much of a surprise that he was there. But it was still like, people were making a point, like they just want to be here. And I think that's why that's why people like Embiid, and that's why do you think we never really accepted Jahlil Okafor? Because he did that one little thing he did with the jersey. Remember when he dropped the jersey?
Yeah.
When he got drafted? People didn't like that. People don't like that. They're like, no, that's not. You're here. That's it. You like it or you don't. It don't really matter who you are, And I think that was, why everybody was so mad at Chip Kelly too, because when he started getting rid of certain people on the team and stuff like that, it's just. I think it's just pretty obvious that people just love to be here because of the type of vibe the city has. But look at Embiid. He goes out every. When he goes out, he just goes to like a regular place. That I could go to. He's not in places where you can't get. He's with the people and he dances with everybody. It's just a different thing.
Yeah, Ben Simmons is he's at Drake night at the Fillmore.
Jay-Z supports Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Look at all the people coming out for Meek and speaking out. Big, humongous, powerful people. And it's like, Meek is a dude from Dirt Street. They got a record deal with Rick Ross. And, it really, if you look at it, you don't understand how it adds up. But you have to give the credit to the city because of how the city is and how the culture is like formed. How the culture is formed here. It comes from so many things and so deep rooted. It's like people feel it. You know what I mean? Did you see the? I'm gonna change the subject real quick, but there was on T.I.'s Instagram. They showed a conversation of him talking to Meek yesterday when Meek got home, and they're just laughing and laughing and laughing. And he says, "Yeah, I told you, Meek, don't take that 10-year probation. I told you that." And it just they both started laughing, and it's just like. Why are people? It just reminds me of why are people so loyal to Meek? What did he do that Beanie didn't do? You know what I mean? When Beanie was big, Beanie was as Philly as you can get. Just like and he made legal mistakes just like Meek did. But what kept everybody? What's keeping everybody on Meek's side? And it's just because it's all about timing and personality and just when you do good for people, I think it just comes back to you. Like he had to deal with these little things, but he's been doing good and doing good for for the community, so he didn't stay punished for it. You know what I mean? The energy here. I think that's what keeps everything going.
I mean, one of the Sixers owners literally wrote a letter to the judge saying Meek's kids and my kids hang out. That's the kind of relationship that we have, and it's they come from totally different worlds. It's unbelievable.
And we just beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Okay, Robert Kraft visits Meek Mill. The Patriots posted on their main page, our pal is home, and it's a picture of Kraft and Meek Mill, the old picture. And I'm we just beat these dudes in the Super Bowl.
He's a Trump supporter too.
And they can't help but to give the city a look.
That's crazy. And we're about to play the Celtics. We're about to play the Celtics in the playoffs. They're connected to this whole thing. What do you think?
I was telling Mel, my wife this morning. I'm it boggles my mind because Meek's not this rich. He's not that rich. He's not Robert Kraft rich. He's not Sixers owners rich.
No, he's not Jay-Z rich. He's not Rick Ross rich. Yeah.
He's got good money, but he's not that. He's not like that. He's not that level.
No.
You know what I mean?
No.
He's not close to that level, and usually that level sticks with that level.
He's not Kevin Hart rich. Put it that way.
Yeah, he's not Kevin Hart exactly,
yeah, that's right.
I don't know. I know Kevin Hart has a lot to do with the motivation here too. It's just positive energy, man.
Absolutely. We'll be hearing back from Mario Collazo about now that Meek Mill is free. What will he do now? And other issues related to, again, this very special time in Philadelphia, very interesting historical times in the city of brotherly love. But before we get back to Mario, I wanted to give everyone an update on the latest DACA court decision that took place this week. And I actually had planned to have sort of our resident immigration policy expert on Ray's talk show, Carlos Guevara, my colleague from Unidos US, to come back on the show to discuss these issues. Unfortunately, I would like to say something fancy like, well, we had scheduling conflicts. The reality is the other night, my sons wouldn't go to bed and it was getting too late to ask Carlos to wait for me to get on the line. But he was gracious enough to shoot me a note so I could share with people what this week's court decisions mean. So this federal decision is yet another court decision that slaps down the administration's decision to end DACA, but goes a step further by potentially, in quotes, opening the door to DHS having to start taking initial DACA requests. So people who may have been eligible in the past, but for whatever reason had never applied for their initial DACA status. So that's in the offing potentially with this decision, but a huge but, Carlos puts in all caps. There was a wonky provision in the decision that is causing some confusion. The judge essentially said before the decision takes effect, he's going to give DHS an opportunity about 90 days to sort of provide the legal justification for their initial revocation of DACA. So they don't then have to take those initial steps until they provide their explanation or at least through this window until late July, they have to provide this explanation. So a lot of confusion yesterday. So no new DACA applications, but that's not the case for now. So it definitely builds the momentum on some level for a call for a legislative solution to resolve this nonsense. There is a Queen of the Hill rule that's trying to be implemented by a bipartisan group of legislators, so we can potentially get some DACA DACA legislation bills voted on in the House of Representatives. So keep an eye on that. But there is some precedent for that sort of obscure legislative vehicle to sort of usurp what Speaker Ryan could put on the floor and sort of force their hand to take some votes on DACA on the House. So keep an eye on that. But that's seen as sort of a political messaging attempt for some people that have political on both sides of the aisle to have political incentives to show that they're trying to address DACA in some way, particularly Republicans in California and other places that are in trouble politically this year. So thank you, Carlos, for that update. And we'll have Carlos Guevara and Jose Sanchez and other immigration legal experts on the show as those legal as the ongoing sort of legal battle to keep DACA intact and ultimately push the hand of legislators to do something in Congress evolves. Let's hear back now from Mario Collazo and continue the conversation with the question, what does Meek Mill do now? Let me ask you a question. What do you think is what's Meek Mill's next move? What do you think he does next?
Oh, Meek Mill?
Yeah. I mean, do you think he gets more political, or do you think he sort of takes this on, and kind of how that impacts his art?
Well, he's going to have to. I mean, he's going to have to stick to his word, because if you notice his statement last night, he said, I thank all the supporters, the prayers, and all that, and I'm going to continue to fight for this system. So people that go through this like me, they didn't have the resources I had, but it doesn't mean that they should be where they are, So he basically was like, my celebrity and my, and connects because of loot got me out of here quicker. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but he has to definitely back that up. He has to keep, and I think he will keep advocating for that kind of thing. I think he has no choice at this point.
Yeah, the older I get, and the more I realize how. I mean, I know the system's screwed up in many ways, but especially the probation piece, because I've heard stories where a guy had an ankle bracelet and the battery ran out, or a kid unplugged the battery, and since it was off and they were offline for 10 minutes, then they went back in prison. I mean, there's a lot of problems, and when you constantly, look, if any of us were on probation for 10 years, we'd get in trouble for something, a traffic violation. Yeah. A mistake on your taxes. Things happen, and as I say on the show all the time, is that you can make anything illegal if you want, Yeah.
Well, it's designed that way to keep people down, because
that's right.
Nobody should have a 10-year probation. That doesn't even. You're not giving anybody a chance. And when a violation is just contact with a policeman, and you run a stop sign, even if you don't run a stop sign, and that cop is in a bad mood and you're on probation, you got to go to jail for 2 years, because you kind of breeze through the stop sign a little, like everybody on Earth does. You kind of just didn't stop. You kind of just moseyed on through it. That there's no reason that he should have been in jail and stopped, especially with the charges he had dropped, because they weren't really valid charges, but just because police were in the showed up, that's the violation.
And I go back to the same thing. It's that the two biggest movements in this country, the most powerful, the ones that one I think screws up our politics, the other one is different, but is suburban America, white America males. Hey, we want our guns and we want our pot. And what are a lot of our people in jail for? Guns and pot. Yep. So, we just want to be consistent. We can argue, having a debate about where those things fit in society is cool. We can have that conversation, but we got to be consistent. And, Meek knows he's lucky because he has the celebrity, he's got the fame, he's got the resources to fight these things in court. And he got the momentum. If the Eagles are 6-10 this year, I don't think this happens. I'll be honest. So a lot of things this has given him an opportunity, a platform to fight for a lot of our young boys that that aren't as fortunate as you and I, Mario, that we're able to avoid those situations. What else is on your mind, man? I know you and the family always got something to promote. Want to make sure people know what's happening with you guys.
For myself, I'm trying to figure myself out, but I got some stuff that'll be coming at some point soon. But for right now, my sons are making some really good music, man. So I want you guys to follow. My oldest is Marcus. His page is at King Charisma, and it's KX instead of KI. So King Charisma, and then there's Element, which is my son Mario, at Element, or at Official, I think it's _Element on Instagram. He got a new song out called Reborn, new video. Just go check it out. I'm at Planetary, AOTP. If you want to do that, it can lead you to all those other places too. because I promote them a lot. So as of now, that's it, man. I got some new clothes that I'm gonna come out with too.
Really? Wow. This is a break on me.
I'm working on some designs, but it's not really going to be this portion of it. I'm not tying into the music. It's more going to be a motivational shirts, like, you know.
Well, I can't wait. I know you and Elle have been flirting with a podcast for quite some time, so I'm hoping at some point before I get more gray hairs that I'll see a Elle and Planet podcast come debut.
We started. We have stuff that we haven't put out yet. We're just working out.
I know you're messing with Anchor and all that stuff.
It's all about timing, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what we're trying to do is more like the way what's his name? What's the dude's name? You know, the comedians were drinking coffee in the car. What the hell is that? I can't think of his name.
Seinfeld, yeah, like comedians in cars or whatever, yeah.
You know, but not in that sense, because I think he does a bad job at that. But in that, you know, driving around and talking, we did some, you know, me and him together is a funny thing. So people got to see it.
Well, you guys have to get to the point where you just create like a big beef with Jesus and Mero. That's what I want to see. I want to see that.
Yeah, but they're corny anyway.
Wow. Yeah, they're very New York. I got love for them because they blew up with the podcast piece, but they definitely get overrated because of being New Yorkers. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really get into them, but I'm not.
Are you at envy on this beef? Are you at envy on this beef? Anyway, that's another conversation. Planetary, Mario Collazo, a.k.a. Planetary. Check him out. And check out Element and King Charisma as well. We'll be watching, brother. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 76ers.
Hey, Ray, trust me, I got you on a game, because we're going to one of these games.
Okay, well, I'm just let me know, brother. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right. Oh, yep.
Thank you, Mario Collazo. Much respect to our young boys, my nephews, who are hip-hop artists in their own right, King Charisma and Element. And we'll definitely be promoting their music and their art on our social media channels. So we're hip hop here at Ray's Talk Show. Wanted to give people, as we wrap up today's show, my sort of Puerto Rico update for the day. You know, Governor Ricardo Rossello is trying to get in the political mix on the mainland. So this, a few days ago, Governor Rossello announced the launch of a new political organization intended to influence the November 2018 midterm elections by mobilizing the Puerto Rican vote in Florida. The organization is called Poder, which is power in Spanish. It's a nonpartisan civic engagement organization focused on voter registration and political participation of U.S. citizens from Puerto Rico. It was launched to help those with the idea of helping people fully participate in the democratic process and become agents of change for the island, people based throughout the diaspora, but particularly in Florida. This announcement took place in Orlando a few days ago. You know, I'll say this. I've been interviewed by other media outlets about what I thought about this project of the governor. And so I wanted to share with people a few things. One is, you know, on some level, I don't know. And I say that because when you talk about whether it's the governor of Puerto Rico or anyone that's starting a voter mobilization effort in any community, but in this case, the Puerto Rican community, you know, there's several sort of governance and capacity questions I have. Is this a partisan effort? Is it a PAC? Now, this alludes to the fact this article indicates to me it's a nonpartisan effort, so it'd be a 501c3 organization. You know, the legalities of, you know, there's some legal questions as to, you know, the role of a elected official sort of leading the effort of a nonpartisan nonprofit organization doing electoral work outside of their jurisdiction. And so, you know, who's funding this project? Where's the funding coming from? What kind of capacity is being built in a relatively short period of time? The elections are less than 6 months away. In a community like Orlando, how will this project potentially work? So even if you get beyond those questions, how will this project work with the efforts that are already taking place? My day job, for full disclosure, Unidos US has a pretty substantive operation. It's been there for many, many years that I've been a part of. Other organizations, Mi Familia Vota, the newish work that's being done there by groups like the Hispanic Federation and other organizations. You know, there's already stuff happening there. So even if you assume that we can resolve some of these other questions related to where's the money coming from, how legit is this sort of logistically and from a, governance perspective, how will this effort complement and not sort of step on the toes or get in the way or complicate matters for the people that are already doing the work on the ground in places like Central Florida? And will the groups and will the Puerto Rican communities that are not in as sexy political areas like that are significant parts of the diaspora in New York and Pennsylvania and Chicago and New Jersey and Connecticut, will they be involved in this movement? So lots of questions to be answered. And again, this is not the first time. We've had a few other moments in the last recent history where governors of Puerto Rico, for various political reasons, have implemented essentially nonpartisan voter mobilization efforts to mobilize Puerto Ricans in the mainland, because we can vote in federal elections where people on the island can't because of colonialism and systematic disenfranchisement by U.S. Congress of Puerto Ricans when we live on the island. The 80s effort led sort of eventually to the election of now Congressman Nydia Velázquez. The effort in the late 90s, early 2000s had, mixed results depending on communities. That was over the leadership of then Governor Sila Calderon. So this is not the first time we've had this dynamic. The question will be, the proof's in the pudding. How's it going to be organized? So, those questions remain, and we'll continue to monitor that and share what's happening in Central Florida with our friends, not only at my day job, Unilucias, but friends of ours like Jimmy Torres, Betsy Franceschini, and others doing good work in Central Florida related to civic engagement. The other thing I wanted to note is I've gotten, through the Bochincha line, I've gotten some thoughts of mine sort of confirmed that, I've been stating as sort of speculating that possibly, one of the things as a next political move that our iconic mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, Carmen Yullin, could do as an option. She's talked about and seriously considering running for governor of Puerto Rico in 2020, which seems like an obvious thing to do. But another possibility with her potentially moving to the mainland, to a Central Florida, to a South Florida, to another community with a significant Puerto Rican Latino population, and getting involved in politics in the States. And so I don't think she's made that decision, or she may not be seriously considering it, but I wanted to share with people that my sources are telling me that some very, very, very high players, including Senator Elizabeth Warren, have broached that possibility with Mayor Carmen Yullin. So I just wanted to share with people that little nugget, that little bit of chisme, a little bit of information, because, Ray Collazo's not sitting there. I'm not crazy. So I'm not the only one thinking these things. So, would she be seen as a carpetbagger doing that? Is that the right thing to do? Is that abandoning the island? I'm not, that's a conversation for another time, but I just wanted to share that people in very, very, some of the highest progressive Democratic circles in this country have also had the same notion and thought she could provide a lot to the table if she Carmen Yullin continued her political career in the mainland. So those conversations will continue to happen. That speculation will continue to fester, I would imagine. But Puerto Rican leadership on the island is certainly going to be an ongoing factor in the upcoming federal midterm elections. And thank you so much for listening to Ray's Talk Show. Continue to support the philanthropic efforts of people like my dear friend Vanessa Rivera, and I'll be putting in the show notes. She'll be traveling to the island of Puerto Rico next week to provide aid in the Naguabo region. So they're looking for donations for medical supplies and solar-powered lanterns, because we still have a significant amount of people on the island who still are without electricity. It's unbelievable that that's still happening to American citizens 7 months after a natural disaster. And continue to support the work of people doing good work throughout the country, whether it's supporting our dreamers, pushing back against federal budget cuts that impact the most vulnerable people in our society, like SNAP and Medicaid and other programs. And I will be in Orlando May 14th, having an event which we'll be sharing on those issues. So if you want to catch me in Florida, Central Florida, very soon, I will be there. So I look forward to be spending some more time with our friends in Central Florida. Thank you again so much for joining Ray's Talk Show. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the show, rate us, rank us, review us on iTunes, and wherever you download the podcast. That helps us get more exposure in the iTunes store and in the iTunes search engines, and it'll provide more people an opportunity to hear our message here that we will not be silenced on Ray's Talk Show. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic weekend.